right, everyone. So today we're going to be looking at two topics that go hand in hand. So we're looking at habitat loss. So what we mean there is habitat loss for different various species. In particular in Ontario, which would be more of a forest ecosystem. And land fragmentation, which has to do with when essentially cities or towns are deciding on where to build different things, how do they decide on how much land they're going to actually be needing? Okay, so again, so habitat loss. So why are we losing? Why are species losing their forest ecosystem habitats? Right, for humans. So with in not so many words. So to have agricultural space so we can grow different crops and we can sell them in supermarkets or farmers markets for people. For us to build human settlements like homes and churches and schools and businesses, all kinds of different things that humans will need to have buildings for, right? We need the space to go ahead and build them. And of course, we need a roadway system. So highways, side streets, any sort of roadway where we have to get from one place to another. They want to have access. They have to obviously clear the land to build that road. So most of southern Ontario's ecosystem, the forest ecosystem, has been essentially removed for human sprawl or urban sprawl. So essentially for human use. A lot of it, even though we know obviously we need space for humans to live and to have places to go, a lot of it though is cleared for agricultural space. So on southern Ontario has some of the richest soil. I don't want to say in Canada, but definitely in Ontario because of the temperate deciduous forest. So what ends up happening is we have a lot of that land for essentially farmland. So this is just an example to show you the differences in terms of what southern Ontario has used to have as a natural ecosystem space and what it now currently has. So most of southern Ontario has been converted from the natural ecosystems to human uses. So the orange area that you see here has essentially been converted into human use. So whether it's a highway or agricultural space or places for people to live and work and go about their business. And on the right-hand side, the green patches are the protected parks and areas where land cannot be destroyed. So, for example, in Richmond Hill, right, we have the Oak Ridges Moraine. There are many areas. So you've noticed that over time, if you live nearby, they are starting to build more and more development. So condos, they have the community center there. They're building more things. But there is certain sections that are protected lands that they are not able to build on. So you can see here it's actually not a lot of space that is protected, but as you can see, there are big patches where there's not a lot of human development either. Now that's for several reasons. So this could be because the soil is not of good quality. It could be that it's very difficult to build, let's say, a city in, because what happens here, as you go further and further north, and if you've ever gone up north towards Sudbury or North Bay, or even if you've taken this route towards Ottawa, most people go around, but this is very rocky and very hilly. So it's not really a great location for human development, or it's not available for agricultural space. So most of that prime land for agricultural space is in southern Ontario. So this is just an example looking at a specific species, just to show you kind of the habitat loss that's happened. So the loggerhead shrike is a species of birds that inhabited southern Ontario quite a bit. So southern Ontario is essentially its breeding grounds. So obviously they're birds, they can fly, they migrate, they move in different areas, but this is where they tend to come back and have their the next generation, right? So they lay their eggs. So the light green, like the teal color, is actually the originating area where this loggerhead shrike was known to go and breed. So you can see it's actually quite a wide range of space. Now, in present day and age, the only areas where they've actually seen the loggerhead shrike doing their breeding is in the black regions. So you can see it's a much, much smaller space because that space has been used for human development in human areas. So there's not a lot of forest ecosystem that may happen to be there. So obviously this is not just an Ontario problem. This is a problem that's happening worldwide, some areas more so than others, of course. So it depends on where there is expanding populations. So the most significant habitat loss actually comes from areas where they're clearing the space for agriculture for international trading. So, for example, in the continent of Africa, right, where they have lots of rich soils, Latin America, so Southern America, and the Caribbean, they're able to grow different types of plants and fruits and vegetables, sugar canes, coffee beans, right, all things that places want to import different things. So, for example, like, I'll give you an example, coffee. So majority of our coffee in North America comes from either Latin America or I guess would Costa Rica be considered Caribbean? No, that's Central America. But a lot of it anyways comes from Brazil and Colombia. So in Latin America, they have literally huge sections that they're just clearing because they have to grow more, and the demand is higher and higher for coffee beans around the world. And of course, they have the rich soil that is prime time and the temperature, right, that is prime for growing that type of plant. So a lot of these regions are, even though some areas are obviously not a fully developed space, you still have a lot of habitat loss that's happening. So the red sections that you'll see here are places that do not have a lot of, I should say that places that are losing the habitat sections or their ecosystems for natural development at a quick pace. So critical or endangered in terms of habitat loss. So you'll see there's a lot of red, even in the southern points of Australia here, right? In Asia, we have some sections. Europe is not great. If you've ever been to Europe, there's not really a ton of space. If you're walking in a major city, there's very rarely will you see a park. Like, a lot of the space is used for human development in human areas, or for I'm just thinking, for example, in Spain, right, places where they grow, let's say they have vineyards and they're growing wine or different things that they're going to export to different countries, right? They want to clear that space and use it to grow that. So countries want to take obviously it's a balance, right? So it's the economics of it. We want to make money for our country. We want to export goods. So they want to use what their specialty is. So whatever it happens to be. So, for example, in Florida, right? So Florida grows quite a bit of produce that is shipped all over North America. So things like oranges, lemons, limes, avocados. There's lots of things that we cannot grow in Ontario. For example, Richmond Hill, we can't grow oranges all year round. But Florida, obviously, that's their specialty. So it has to be a balance though, right? So obviously you want your country to do well, or your state or your city, but at what cost, right? So you have the different threats here, different levels. Okay, so one area that is on the critical side is actually the Amazon rainforest. So what's happening is, in order to increase the amount of agricultural space, right, they're running out of agricultural space, they're starting to clear different sections of the rainforest, because if you know anything about rainforest, right, it has a very high biodiversity, which means there's lots of different species of plants and animals. So what happens is the soil in a rainforest is the richest soil probably anywhere in the world. Because you have so many different nutrients there from the different species, that causes the soil to be very, very rich. and obviously wanted. So what they're doing is they're clearing the land so they can use that soil for agricultural reasons. So how can we avoid this? So obviously, wherever it's possible, you do want to try and buy local products that are in season. So for example, in the fall time, right, there's lots of apple orchards that are in Canada, in Ontario. So local farmers markets are like amazing for this, right? So when you see, let's say, you know, I'll give you an example. Let's say Florida oranges, right, in the store. You have to remember that actually uses up so much energy and fossil fuels to get that orange over to us to buy it at Loblaws. Okay, so it has to, first of all, the energy it takes to grow it, right? So the agricultural, the farmers, the different people who are involved in that process of packing it. But then they have to get it to us. So it's either probably through airplane or a transport truck, something that is using fuel to bring that to us all the way here, all the way in, in Richmond Hill. And obviously, the further something has to travel, the more of a threat it is, because it's going to essentially cost more and more fossil fuel to be burned. So just think twice, if you can support local businesses and local farmers, that's always the best bet. But of course, in the middle of winter, there are still things that are grown in Ontario. So if you ever see the term like hot house, so for example, like hot house tomatoes that are grown, let's say in Niagara, the Niagara region. So what those are they're Ontario grown products that are made in a greenhouse. Because of course the sun is still shining in the winter, so greenhouses are still able to grow products for us. So wherever possible, I know it's obviously easier said than done, but when you can, it's an easy choice that we can make to try and support our own local economy and reduce our carbon footprint. All right, so let's look at fragmentation, land fragmentation. So this is where we're discussing when you have an ecosystem and we want to split it up. So we want to, let's say, build a highway. We want to build a subdivision. How do they go about dividing up the region into smaller parts or fragments? So it's like you're taking something that was a big chunk of land and we're going to split it into smaller chunks. But what we're going to talk about is how do they decide on how many chunks? How big are the chunks going to be? Why does Miss Henson keep saying chunks? But when you're doing this, right, there are some factors that go into considering this. So you're probably wondering, who does this? Who makes these decisions? Who's deciding the chunks that we're doing? So every city or municipality, or even province in Canada, has what's called an urban development team or department. Okay, so the City of Richmond Hill has an urban development department or section. So it's a government body that basically will look at the land and they decide on how they are going to split up the different areas for urban development, which is exactly right what urban sprawl means. We're building things for humans, whether it's a highway or if it's a school or a store, a Loblaws. Okay. So they also decide, you may see signs around, but they also decide on what the land will be used for. So let's say they split this land and they will say, okay, this land is going to be a future highway, or this land is going to be for a future school development. So not only do they split up the land, but they also help to make the decision on what that land will be used for. So we're going to look at the different factors that are considered when they are fragmenting the land. And we're going to look at not only the factor, but what would be the best option possible or the worst option, or I guess I should say a good option or a bad option for developing that land. So we'll look at that in the next part.